Hey guys, welcome back. We know it's been a while since we've had an episode up, but that's because we've been bogged down with various other things over the past few weeks. So we apologize if we haven't been posting as often as we would have liked to. So this week we will be looking ahead to the highly anticipated Lankan Premier League. So it's finally happening. It went from being the Lankan Postponed League to actually being the Lankan Premier League. Every year around this time, we have media angst about a potential T20 league in Sri Lanka, and then you have the inevitable announcement that such plans have been called off. So it's nice to see that this tournament will be up and running on Thursday in Hambantota. And before we delve into discussing this, the Lankan Premier League rather, Kit, why is such a tournament important for Sri Lankan cricket? And having looked at our last trial with such an event, being the SLPL in 2012, what lessons do you think we could potentially take from that edition?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is in terms of exposure to top level international cricket, particularly for the younger Sri Lankan players in the domestic circuit. And that is because the domestic circuit itself is not very competitive. And we've already done an episode about this. So in that absence, I think it's important that our players get some sort of top quality competition and exposure, particularly leading up to the World T20 next year. I think the second aspect of this is, unfortunately, because of our standards in international cricket over the past couple of years, our team members haven't been able to get into any of the international T20 leagues, such as the IPL or the Big Bash, the Caribbean Premier League, and so on. So I think overall, there is a lack of exposure, but also that is partly down to weaknesses in domestic structure. And I guess this is one way of trying to infuse more exposure, trying to infuse more competition to the domestic circuit. That said, I don't necessarily think that having a T20 league per se is going to, be the magic bullet. I think that is one of the big mistakes that the Sri Lankan SLC, Sri Lanka cricket has made in the past, particularly with the SLPL and in years past. Every time they try and kind of say that, an LPL or SLPL will be the magic bullet to solve our problems. I don't think so. Hopefully, the LPL will be a platform for a lot of younger cricketers to stand up and kind of will get to discover young talent. But I think it's important that the SLC doesn't lose track of what the more important root causes for our fall in standards are, and that is a weak domestic system, that is inconsistent selections, and politicization of the entire cricket administration. So I think those are things that need to be addressed. If anyone's expecting the LPL to be the catalyst towards greatness solely on its own, I think they're in for a lot of disappointment.
I think I completely agree with you. And if you look back to the 2012 SLPL, I think one thing that has to be taken into account is the fact that we saw the rise of both Akila Dhananjaya and Dilshan Munavira from the SLPL in 2012. So Akila Dhananjaya was drafted in by Mahela to play for Wayamba United, had an exceptional season, and then was selected for the T20 World Cup, which was also held in Sri Lanka in September 2012. Dilshan Munavira was the leading figure in the Uva Victorious campaign in 2012. Ended up being selected for the Sri Lankan national team and then went on to play in the Caribbean Premier League and in T20 leagues around the world. So I think in that sense, the SLPL proved to be a platform for certain cricketers to enter the international arena. And I think it has had similar effects to the effects we see with the IPL, the Big Bash, the Pakistan Super League, and all that. But I think on a second, sorry.
I kind of get what you mean, but that's also, yes, it helped them enter the fray, but that performance was not sustainable.
No, and
That
that's
was,
exactly
the
what I'm
performance wasn't
making my
sustained.
second
Yeah.
point. I think if you look at our steep decline in T20 cricket over the past 4 or 5 years, I think there was a time immediately after the 2014 World Cup where we were number one ranked side in T20 cricket, and then we suddenly had a steep decline. I think that had a lot to do with the fact that in our current domestic structure, T20 cricket is not emphasized enough. You'll have that odd 1 week extravaganza, a provincial tournament held once a year, just to kind of cover the T20 front. But you have these ridiculous 3-day matches and ODI matches played by a handful of teams, which reduces the competition levels that you need to have in a proper first class structure. But I think what I like about the LPL this year is that it's just 5 teams, and I think that increases the level of competition even amongst our domestic players. Because if you look at every side, I think there are 6 or 7 players who are in our pool or in our setup who are competing for each side. And I think that is something that the Sri Lankan Cricket Board can take into account after the tournament is done with, and perhaps restructure our first class cricket to suit this platform as well, so that there's intense competition for our upper bracket players who are trying to vie for spots in the national team. And I think another quick thing that I wanted to point out was also the fact that if you look at our subcontinental counterparts, so Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, even Afghanistan right now, they all have this T20 league held once a year, which is a constant, and it's something that they believe provides a platform for their youngsters to engage with international cricketers, international coaches, etc. So I think if you look at the Galle Gladiators team, for example, who will be mentored by Wasim Akram, I think for all our up and coming Sri Lankan fast bowlers in that Galle Gladiators setup, this will be a once in a lifetime opportunity to have 3 weeks of complete engagement with someone of the likes of Wasim Akram. And if you look at even the Colombo Kings team, for example, with Herschel Gibbs coming in as a commentator and then being drafted in as a coach, I think even someone with his style and flair could actually kind of nurture those skill sets in these Colombo Kings players. So on that front, do you think that the Sri Lankan Cricket Board has done well in recruiting former players to play the role of mentors in these sides? And do you think amidst this time, amidst COVID, etc., that the Sri Lankan Cricket Board has pulled off something significant?
I'm not ready to, count my chickens before they hatch.
Yeah.
We've already seen a few players. I mean, Afridi missing his flight. Some people, dropping out at the last moment and things like that. I think overall it has been very chaotic. I think things could have been planned a lot better. We don't know what the weather is going to be like over the next couple of weeks. Yeah. So it could all be washed out. I remember going for the final of the SLPL.
Yeah, red curtain.
Washed out. So I think, I mean, yes, there are some embers of hope based on those who have been drafted and so on. But I think we need to be a little bit realistic, and we need to kind of see how things pan out. I'm hoping for the best. I hope that we are able to discover a few new talents. I hope they are able to get through the politicized administration and the selection processes and so on, and have a good career for Sri Lanka. And hopefully they will learn from the likes of Akram, Wasim Akram, and Gibbs and so on. So I think overall, yes, that could happen. I would have been a lot more confident if there was more stability leading up to the tournament, because up until today, I don't think the squads weren't confirmed. And even now when the final list was out, I think 2 or 3 teams have TBCs on it. So I think who are these players that they're expecting to sign up? So it feels a little haphazard. And I think that's one thing. And the second thing is, particularly given that the SLC has financial constraints, how much of the revenue generated through, the media market and advertising and so on is actually coming to the SLC,
Yeah.
and not the, not the company that this has been outsourced to.
Yeah.
So those sort of, there's a lot of
Gray area.
there's a lot of gray, and there's a lot of kind of, I think, the lack of transparency in certain aspects.
Yeah.
That would have given me more confidence. I'm how would I say? I'm cautiously optimistic.
Yeah.
Both as a Sri Lankan fan, I think we've been here before, but also I think I hope that things will, pan out well for us.
Yeah, and I think this leads me on to my final question on this segment. I think if you look at us actually acquiring the television rights from Sony 6, for example, that's a immense lucrative deal for us. But as you said, the extent to which those revenues are channeled towards the SLC is something that neither you or I probably know about. But my final question here is, what would it take for this tournament to be deemed a success? I know you spoke about us getting a few youngsters who we've not heard of excelling at this tournament. Perhaps for me, something that would be deemed a success is if there is continuity going forward, and if this actually happens next year as well. And I think another positive that could result from this is seeing that there is some repercussions on our domestic structures as well, on our first class cricket, one-day cricket and T20 domestic setup. Because if that happens, prompted by the National Sports Council being led by Mahela, if they all come together and use this as a platform to restructure everything that is currently wrong with Sri Lankan cricket, I feel like that would be a success. But in addition to those, are there any other indicators that you look at closely following the conclusion of this tournament?
No, I think the biggest thing would be continuity. I think one thing is continuity, and hopefully the tournament will continue for years to come.
Yeah.
This version of it, there's a franchise, then more global, established version of it. I think the second criteria I am really interested to look at is where we hopefully see at least 3 to 4 players we haven't seen in this national setup break into the national setup and be given a chance for at least the next year. So leading up to the World T20, that they have a genuine chance. So at least 3 to 4 players who break into the system. So I don't want to see the Tirimanas fluffing around in a T20 squad in a year's time for the World T20.
Don't forget about Jeevan Bendis was at it.
Of course, and after, I mean, you never know with SLC, they'll forget about the LPL next month, and then they'll have a trial tournament the week before the World Cup and choose 15 players. I mean, we've been here before. So, I mean, that's what I'm genuinely kind of interested in. I'm not to be very honest, I'm not completely excited about the international players who are playing. I mean, let's be realistic about who's coming to play. But I think what I'm more interested in, I'm genuinely curious and interested and excited about, are seeing young players and seeing how these young players can break into the system. And because, I mean, the sad reality of national Sri Lankan cricket is that we don't see domestic cricket on TV regularly. I mean, we can watch it on I think Papare occasionally, but unless you kind of actively seek it, it's very difficult to kind of follow things and kind of look at how things go because it lacks structure. So I'm interested to kind of sit in front of a TV and kind of watch 2 weeks worth of cricket, where I see new talent coming in and hopefully they perform.
I think that's something that has to be highlighted. It's the fact that if you look at other countries, look at Pakistan, India, West Indies, their domestic cricket is televised and it has a wide appeal. Whereas for us, I think this is the first time where we can actually be glued onto our TV sets in the evenings, watching Sri Lankan cricket with Sri Lankan cricketers who have not been given the limelight prior. So I think this bodes well with our next question, with our next segment rather, about the young players that you're looking forward to seeing at this LPL. So for me, I think there are 4 players that stand out for different reasons. I think the first name that pops up, I think it has to do with all his Royal Tomian exploits, is Kalana Pereira. I think he was someone who was earmarked as being perhaps the next Mitchell Stark or Mitchell Johnson of Sri Lankan cricket, or the only one who could come close as a left-arm bowler.
Did Tomian tell you this?
So he was a Lyceum student who went to St. Thomas's College. So to all our Tomian viewers here, I hope you're not offended by me having said that. But no, I think he's someone I'm looking forward to seeing, because I think whilst he played for Sri Lanka at the Under-19 World Cup, he had pace, and I think it's something refreshing to see in a Sri Lankan pacer. I can't remember the last time we've had a left-armer clocking the 130s, 140s on a regular basis. I think the second player I'm looking forward to seeing is Kevin Kottigoda, who was actually brought in by Candy Tuskers yesterday. So I had the fortune of watching him on Sky Sports last year when there was absolutely nothing else to watch. I was forced to watch the Abu Dhabi T10, and he had a few exceptional spells. He's a mystery leg spinner with a very unique action, like Paul Adams. And it's something that I look forward to seeing at the LPL, to see if it's something that can be sustained and if he can actually compete on a regular basis at this on this arena. I think a third player who's someone who's shown promise in international cricket already is Lasith Embuldeniya. And why I'm saying this is because he has done exceptionally well for us in Test cricket. Kind of was one of the only players who helped us win that Test series in South Africa. But we've hardly seen him in limited overs cricket. We've hardly seen him in T20. So I would like to see if he could be someone we could use across formats. And the final player I have earmarked as a potential player that I'm looking forward to seeing is Lahiru Udara, who is someone who has scored a lot of runs in the first class setup, a lot of runs in the ODI setup domestically. But because of certain barriers that both you and I don't know about, he never gets an opportunity ahead of the likes of Lahiru Tirumana, who continuously take a claim in the national side. So I think those are the 4 players I'm looking forward to seeing the most. Would you agree, or are there some names that I may have missed out on?
No, I think I broadly agree. And to be very honest, I must confess that I don't know many of the young players, because I haven't been able to keep track of the younger squads in recent times. But I think one player that I'm interested in seeing is Minod Bhanuka.
Yes.
And I think he has shown promise in the domestic circuit and the under-19 level. So hopefully, I think that's one thing. And I think Podimaling, what's his name? Nuwan Tushara, I think. Yeah. I mean, it's always nice to see these kind of bowlers with weird actions. And to see, I don't know how effective he will be, and whether he's, hyped up purely for his action rather than, delivery. Yeah. It would have been nice for, I think, if Malinga was around as at least a coach or a mentor for, a few of these fast bowlers. But, I mean, so be it. I think Malinga has a reasonable case. I think he makes a valid point, and we'll get to that later. But I think you kind of covered most of the young players, and like I said earlier, to be very honest, I really don't know, which is why I'm excited to watch this tournament, because I want to see new players.
Yeah, and I think this links very nicely to our next question. So initially, we would have assumed that there would be uncertainties solely revolving around foreign players.
Sorry. One other thing is I want Avishka Fernandez to take a much more kind of consistently leadership role in the team and performances. I think he is one for the future. Yeah. And I want to see him consistently perform at a high level.
No, I agree. I think we also addressed the potential that Avishka Fernandez has in one of our other episodes when we did the Sri Lankan all-time 11 as well. I think our previous segment links nicely to our question on Maling, because you would have assumed that the only uncertainties around players attending the tournament would revolve around foreign players, but Lasith Malinga kind of entered the frame with his comment, which I think he has retracted. There are reports coming in that the Goa Gladiators have managed to get a hold of him and get him to play at the tournament, which I'm not too sure about. But my question to you is, if you don't see much of Lasith Malinga at the LPL, would you say that this is the end of his T20 career / international T20 career for Sri Lanka? And would it then be a good reason for Sri Lanka cricket to move past him, seeing that this is the first time they're having a T20 tournament of this nature in the past 8 years, and he would be someone you would look at as a marquee local player to kind of spread the appeal of the tournament. And I think even as you said, even as a mentee, if he said, look, I might not be at my peak in terms of performance, but I'm willing to stay around the guys and be a bowling coach / mentee, I think he could have handled his announcement slightly differently. But do you think that would be a good excuse for Sri Lanka cricket to look past him, or would you still continue to give him chances in the run up to the T20 World Cup?
Well, I think Sri Lanka cricket needs to start planning for a life without Lasith Malinga.
Yeah.
And that has been true for a while now, and we all know that he's definitely going to retire at the end of the World T20 if he plays.
Yeah.
So I think it's high time, and I think this is a good opportunity. I mean, maybe we are being forced into it, but I think the fact that there is a tournament being playing without Malinga means that now we have to kind of concentrate on the resources that we have and develop the resources that we have. And, you know, I'll be interested to kind of have this chat with Mickey Arthur, hopefully in the future. Yeah. You know, I think that's the plan. That's the plan, to kind of plan for life beyond Malinga. I think one of the big mistakes we make as a country is planning for the short term. So we always think, okay, Sangha and Mahela will play for until the 2014 T20 World Cup. As long as we get performances out of them, that's it, rather than develop the next core, you know. Yeah. Similarly, I think Dilshan was a massive loss, and kind of planning for life beyond Dilshan. Sure. Similarly, the likes of Vas, Murali, and so on. And Herat now. So I think it's time that we planned and got into executing the plan of finding talent and developing talent for life beyond Malinga. Yeah. But having said that, I don't think Malinga should be counted out of the World T20 just because he isn't playing this tournament. Yeah. Because like I said earlier, I think he has a valid point that all of this was very haphazard, and particularly the way the fixture schedule has been made, particularly how I think games are, you know, the games were organized and this tournament was organized. I think players have a legitimate reason to be concerned about their health, because I would rather have a fit Malinga for the World T20 than him, damaging his ACL during this tournament because he's unfit and playing at, I don't know, 50%. Sure. And I think Malinga has a valid reason to be out of the system. Of course, you know, there is the social media, outrage about Malinga all the time. I think it's uncalled for. Yeah. But like I said, I think Malinga needs to be given. That doesn't mean that Malinga gets an automatic place in the World T20 squad. Yeah. He needs to be given games leading up to it. And if he doesn't perform, then he's not, he doesn't deserve a place. Yeah. But purely based on this tournament, I don't think he should be making a decision.
Yeah, and I think what you just said about Sri Lanka cricket always just planning for the short term, I think it has been that way for a good 20, 25 years. I think they got away with it in the in the early 2000s when we had to see off the likes of Arvind, Arjun, etc., because we had that gifted generation of the likes of Mahela, Sangha, Dilshan, Vas, Murali, who were still remaining in the setup. But I think we've only seen the effects of that short-term planning after we've lost that entire generation now. And I think Malinga is the last one who still remains. And as you said, I think it would be unfair to place a burden on him to carry the reins of Sri Lankan cricket on his shoulders in T20 cricket for too much longer. And I think now it's time for the next generation of senior players like Angelo Matthews, Yusuf Rudana and co to step up and take up the mantle and to perform consistently on that front. Before we move on to talking about how this tournament is good preparation for the World T20 and for Mickey Arthur to plan ahead, because we have to also touch upon the foreign players coming in. Which 5 foreign players are you most excited to see playing in Sri Lanka, or others? I'm not talking about the retired Indians coming down. I'm talking about the active cricketers who will play a part in hopefully in 2 or 3 editions of the LPL.
I mean, to be very honest, I'm not that excited about most of the players. I think, for example, Afridi has long passed his peak. I mean, he's good name recognition. I'm sure it will develop a market. The television market in Pakistan will explode whenever he plays. But in terms of cricketing contribution, I'm not sure he's going to be contributing much.
Yeah.
He might prove me wrong. He might be the player of the tournament at the end of 2 weeks. Such is sport.
Such is boom, boom,
yeah, I mean, but I don't think over the past 10 years at least, I mean, possibly even longer, he really hasn't performed. I mean, he has been, a passenger most of the time. I think a few international players. One is, I think, Chadwick Walton is someone that, might be interesting to watch. I mean,
so for me, I think, as I said, I think Chadwick Walton was one name that stood out because he's been exceptional in the Caribbean Premier League. Seeing Andre Russell in Sri Lanka will be good as well. I think he's someone who prides himself in being a T20 specialist and a T20 globetrotter. So I think that would be nice to see him here. And I think another 2 players that I'm going to keep a close eye on are Kais Ahmed of Afghanistan, who is apparently tipped to be the next Rashid Khan. And I've seen him in a few T20 leagues. So I saw him in that aforementioned Abu Dhabi T10, and I've also seen him in the Big Bash, and there's a video circulating of a bouncer he bowled as a leg spinner to Andre Russell, surprising Russell in the Big Bash. And I think it'll be nice to see some good young international spinners joining the likes of Akil Dhananjaya, Wanindu Hasaranga and co, and perhaps mentoring them as well in terms of various skill sets that are needed. And a final international, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and 2 other international players who I think will have significant impact to the LPL is Mohammad Amir. I'm looking forward to seeing him. I think he's someone who has been discarded by Pakistani cricket as of late and used as a bit of a scapegoat for Pakistan's recent poor performances in T20 cricket, especially after we whitewashed them in Pakistan. And I think a final player who is very underrated is Paul Stirling of Ireland. I've seen him excel in Irish cricket, in international cricket. I think he's been one of the mainstays of the Irish setup over the past decade. And I think it'll be nice to see him here adding some British flavor to things, along with the likes of Samit Patel, etc. So yeah, there are a few international cricketers I'll keep an eye on. But as you said, I think the main focus has to be our domestic players and the impact. And all the positives that the international players could bring in should be channeled towards developing domestic players. Sorry, you had something to say.
Yeah, I think the one player, I think, even though he might not perform particularly well given his recent injury spate, would have a massive contribution to the tournament and the team around him is Dale Steyn.
Definitely, yeah.
So I think the players around him will hopefully learn a lot from him. And I really like him as a player and a person. So I hope he has recovered from his injuries, and I think it'll always be nice to watch him perform at a high level if he's fit.
Exactly. Yeah, no, definitely. And seeing the 5 teams, which teams stand out for you as potential favorites, and which ones do you think are lagging behind?
So I think the most well balanced are probably the Candy Tuskers to me. Both in terms of the international players that they've recruited.
You really like Kusal Mendes, don't you, Kith?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think an opening pair of Kusal Pereira and Kusal Mendes, I think, should
Brilliant.
set them up really well. Brendan Taylor coming at number three,
Yep.
uh, and and I mean the likes of Vishwa Fernando, Lassit Tambuldeni, and so on. I think
Yep.
that interests me. I would say the dark horses and pun sort of intended here are the Jaffna
Number one.
Stallions.
Sorry?
Are the Jaffna Stallions?
Oh, I
Uh,
had Definite Stallions as one of my favorites. I'll get to that once you're done.
yeah. So I don't trust any team with Tisara Pereira in it. Uh, that's the only reason I'm not putting them as favorites. But I think they've got a really good kind of team there as well, and I think they've got and then they've got some young players who
Few
I'm
of our ardent followers already stating this to me along the likes of, oh, Viren, you always favor Angelo Matthews and Kith always favors Kusal Mendes and Kusal Pereira. So I assume they'll have a lot to say about our favorite teams going forward. Because for me, my two favorite teams would be Colombo Kings and Jaffna Stallions. I think if you look at Jaffna Stallions, I think they have the best blend of international players and our domestic players. I think the likes of Johnson Charles, Shoaib Malik, and co. And I feel like they have Tom Moores as well, if I'm not mistaken, who is someone with a lot of with a lot of potential. I think they have good, along with the likes of Tissa Pereira, Wanindu Hasaranga and co. I think they have a good setup there. And I think Colombo Kings, I think they have the core Sri Lankan players in Angelo Matthews, Dinesh Chandimal, Isuru Dana, backed by Andre Russell, Kez Ahmed. So if those five fire, I think those five will be the core of the Colombo Kings team. But if you look back at the 2012 SLPL, everyone thought Wamble United were going to whitewash every other team in the comp. But it was Uber Next who came out of absolutely nowhere. They potentially had the worst team on paper with Shivnarayan Chandrapal, Andrew McDonald, Jacob Oram, who had all passed their prime, win the competition. And along the same lines, I think Dambula Vikings will be my underdogs. Dasun Shanaka led the Sri Lankan team very well in Pakistan in that T20 series. And I think they have a setup there. If I'm not mistaken, Avishka Fernando is playing for Dambula Vikings. But I think apart from that, they have players like Samit Patel, Anwar Ali, who are T20 specialists. And I think they could back Dasun Shanaka up really well on that front. So,
no, I think Avishka Fernando is playing for.
Is it?
Avishka Fernando is playing for Jaffna Stallions.
Oh, okay. So that adds to my reasoning as to why I think they are tipped to be my favorites. That moves on to our next question on the preparations for the World T20, and this is our final segment on this episode. If you were Mickey Arthur, what would you be looking out for most at this tournament? And what would you use this as the platform to kind of start shortlisting players for contention for next year's T20 World Cup?
Yes, not necessarily shortlist, but I would say would have like a idea of about 30 players who I would want to work with for the next year, working towards the World T20. I think the one thing that if I were a coach, that I look forward to in kind of these sort of tournaments is temperament and kind of cricket IQ.
Yeah.
So you may not score the big hundreds per se,
Yeah.
but show me that you have the temperament to play in pressure situations. Taking the game, and making sure that you win a game, even if you score just 20 runs.
Yeah.
Make sure that you kind of carry the bat not carry the bat, but kind of make sure that you win the game for your team, showing cricket IQ. So if you're a bowler, when a batsman hits you for 2 sixes, just take some time, think about how you want to deliver the next 2 balls in the over. I think those sort of things. So I would look for skill. Obviously, comes, and that's something you can work with.
Yeah.
I think, but cricket IQ is something that is lacking in a lot of our local players, and that's, I think, the issue with the local school structure onwards. And that is something if I were Mickey Arthur, I would kind of look and focus on is like temperament and cricket IQ. And this is not to say, this is not, general knowledge IQ, but rather, game management and being able to kind of adapt to different situations.
I think in addition to IQ, I think there are two things that I would touch upon. One would be leadership skills. I think if you look at the IPL, for example, I think Rohit Sharma, KL Rahul, players who were never originally tipped to be potential Indian captains, have showcased their leadership skills and qualities. I think none more so than Shreyas Iyer this year at the IPL, leading the Delhi Capitals to the final. Prior to last year's IPL, no one tipped him to be a potential candidate for Indian captaincy going forward. So I think the likes of Banka Rajapaksa, who is now the vice captain of Goa Gladiators, will have to step in as captain whilst Afridi makes his way to Sri Lanka. Hopefully he catches his next flight down, but until he arrives, Banka will have to lead the team. And I think for Mickey Arthur to see perhaps the likes of Avishka Fernando taking up some leadership in Jaffna Stallions as well, and seeing these young players who aren't really in the fray for captaincy showcasing their promise and potential will be something interesting. And I think I'm also looking at skill sets. For example, seeing the likes of Karna Pereira running in to bowl at Andre Russell in the 18th or 19th over to see how he deals with death bowling against the best international players around on that front, or how our batsmen deal with the likes of Kez Ahmed, Dale Steyn, and co. Because these aren't the types of bowlers they're used to facing week in, week out on pitches like the one we see in Galle on a weekly basis. It's not something that our domestic cricketers are used to. And because we haven't had a tournament of this nature for 8 years, and because we have only selected a very limited number of players and given them given them an exposure to international cricket, I think it's safe to assume that this is the first time that this generation is going to have this form of competition and also this exposure to being on national television every night. And I think the pressures that come with being in broadcasted matches each evening, I think is something that I look forward to seeing. A worry I'll have if I'm Mickey Arthur, seeing that both my sports teams seem to be plagued by injury crises at the minute, is the risk of injuries. Because I think when you're asking Angelo Matthews and co, who don't have the best track record when it comes to being injury prone, to play 8 matches within a span of 14 days at high levels of intensity, that could lead to long-term injuries. So that's something I will be a tad wary of if I'm in the selection committee of Sri Lankan cricket. But I think apart from all that, I think, as you said, this will be a potential platform to start having a pool of players that will be in contention at the World Cup next year. So my final question before we wrap things up is, in 3 or 4 weeks' time, when we sit down to review the LPL, what would be your best case scenario? I know I touched upon this earlier, but what would be your best case scenario? Would it be a particular player firing for you? Would it be having 10 or 11 potential newcomers into the Sri Lankan setup? Or would it be the fact that all these Sri Lankan cricket followers were thoroughly engaged throughout? Because at the SLPL, there was a steep decline in interest halfway through the tournament. And there was no difference between having a match behind closed doors, like it will be at Hambantota now, and having it in a normal setting.
I think, like I said earlier, I think I want to focus on local young players and players who will break through. So I'm not even going to say 10 players. I want to see 5 players who have the potential of playing for Sri Lanka. And I don't want to see, just because someone scores a 51 game that makes them an automatic, superstar. I want to see consistency, which is why I kind of set the stand a little higher. I want to see 5 players, young players who will break into the national setup. And I think that is what in the best case scenario, that is what I would hope for in terms of the outcome. I know what your next question is going to be in terms of worst case, what might happen and what we might talk about. I have a very bad feeling that we might be talking a lot about pitchers because Hambantota hasn't seen cricket think for about 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah.
And they've apparently got 10 pitchers
Yeah.
ready. How they rotate, how they manage those pitchers during a 14-day, 18-day period, 14-day period, is unknown. The weather in Hambantota could change. It's generally quite dry, but I don't know what it is going to be like over the next 2 weeks. So the worst case scenario, I think, would be that we start talking about pitchers and how slow things were, and it's going to be a dull tournament. Of course, like you said earlier, injuries. Hopefully, no one gets injured. But I think that's the worst case. But I think best case, and I hope this comes true, that we end up talking about 5 breakthrough players from the domestic setup who can hopefully represent Sri Lanka at the World T20.
Yeah, I think you touched upon the potential worst case scenario. I think especially when you have so many fixtures on one ground, there is room for pitchers to start slowing down significantly. We saw that in the IPL as well when Sharjah was averaging 230, 240 every evening, and then halfway through the tournament it became 130, 140. So hopefully that does not happen, because I think we will lose the glam of the event if that starts happening. And yeah, I think so. To all our followers, if you all are going to be following the Lankan Premier League, depending on interest, you could always let us know if you'd be potentially interested in doing like a mid-season review episode once all the teams play 4 games. That might be a tad interesting, or join us for the season review episode that we'll cover once we hopefully have a successful first season of the LPL. Kith, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No. So let's put it on record. Who we pick to win. So we'll pick one team that we think is going to win that.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to go. I'm going to go with my biases again. A team with Angelo Matthews, Andre Russell, Kez Ahmed for me wins it. For me, it's Colombo Kings.
Okay. In that, I'm going with Jaffna Stallions.
Team Kusal?
No, I'm going with Jaffna Stallions. I'm going to pick who I thought the underdog is going to be. So and I like a team with Avishka Fernando and Vanidhu Hasaranga and so on. The only factor that doesn't give me confidence is Tisara Pereira, but I'm willing to overlook that and go with the Jaffna Stallions.
Pereira as captain, mind you.
Yes. But let's see. I would say Jaffna Stallions would be my pick. Candy Tuskers. I think the Kusals might show faith. Would probably reward my faith in them.
So to all our followers, we apologize once again for being very open about our biases towards certain players. I've always been an Angelo Matthews fan and will always will be. And Kith Mina is on the Team Kusal bandwagon and has been for some time as well. So we hope you guys enjoyed this episode. We look forward to an exciting first season of the LPL, and it'll be nice to see live cricket on our TV sets after a long time, featuring Sri Lankan cricketers, because the only one I've seen is Isuru Udana short stint with the Royal Challengers Bangalore at the IPL. So thanks guys for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you during our next episode. Thanks.